for the live stream. Looks okay. Yes, so the hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome you again to this World Large River and Delta System Source to Sink webinar series. Today, we invite Professor Edgardo Latrubesse give a talk about the South America, the large tropical river systems, particularly the source to sink and the human impact. Before I introduce Edgardo, I would like to see the next webinar next week. Next Wednesday, we will invite Professor Hu Jiawang from Ocean University of China. He will talk about the Yellow River derived sediment all the way from the source to the sink. And then next Friday, again, from now on every week, we will have 2 talks per week. Next Friday, Professor James Whiskey, he will give a talk about the Anthropocene source to sink study contributed to the Earth system next Friday. But remember next Friday, because his time zone and it's 7:30 p.m., we will start half hour later than our normal time. East Coast will be 9:30 a.m. So Beijing will be 9:30. I'm sorry to Australia friend. So there will be 11:30. But all the presentation will live streamed and archived, recorded on the YouTube channel. If you really cannot make the live presentation, you're welcome coming back to rewatch the recorded version on the YouTube channel. So again, our today's speaker, Edgardo, has been leading for 2 decades for international research of the large river system, particularly the long-term basin evolution, morphology dynamics, and global change. And he has been faculty in Singapore, American, Brazil, Argentina universities. So currently, he's leading a working group of tropical rivers of the International Association of the Geomorphologists. And he has received many awards, particularly the G.K. Gilbert Award for excellency in geomorphology research. And so also, he also a consultant for the UN program, the UNPD and RGPC. And so today, once again, we are very happy, very glad to invite him to give us talk about the large tropical rivers. And I think he particularly will talk about the dam impact on the Amazon River basin. So Edgardo, now is your turn. Please share your screen.
Thank you very much. So you can see that, right?
Good.
Good. So. Okay. Can we start?
Yes.
Thank you very much, First of all, I would like to thank you, Paul, for inviting me to present some results, and see also people around the different countries trying to participate in this fascinating seminar, the seminars that you are organizing. Everybody is learning about that, so I want to congratulate you for this incredible webinar series. It's really very impressive, and everybody's learning from this. So that say, I would like to present some results on South America since, into this topic of continental sediment sources and sinks. You mentioned, I have been working with the study of the large rivers of the world for 2 decades in different countries and still having a lot of collaborations and work with the students and colleagues. Currently, we are working in 5 of the largest rivers of the world, the Amazon, Madeira, Negro, and Parana, but also with many others that are really big systems like the Ucayali and Purus and Araguaia, rivers in Southeast Asia, the Irrawaddy in Borneo, but also with the biggest megafans on Earth, like the Chaco megafans and recent discoveries in Central Africa. So our program is linking fluvial research since the hydrogeomorphological point of view can be conceptual research or applied research like human impacts on river management, but also the long-term history of these basins. From the Quaternary, we can do something also about the evolution of these systems since the Tertiary. And what is the focus today? The production and routing of sediments at continental scale is the focus of today. So just to show you more or less what methods we use with my team is, it's cool where we integrate morphodynamic with the quaternary evolution. So we use the different tools from quaternary research that probably you are familiar with, but most people, probably many of these seminars are also very familiar with the morphodynamics analysis. So we do a lot of fieldwork. In both cases, our research is mainly based on fieldwork and collection of data in the systems. And of course, after we have the processing of these materials in the labs, can be lab analysis for mineralogy, geochemistry, chronologies, different kind of modeling, remote sensing interpretation, and geophysical processing. So more or less, it's just to show you what we do from where the data that I'm showing today come. I'm not going to talk about source to sink. The seminar have been covering this in extreme detail and deeply, but everybody knows that this kind of approach is very useful in different ways. It's the scientific point of view to develop a quantitative model of landscape evolution, to study geochemical and sediment mass balances, continental and erosional rates, but also since the applied point of view, we know that this is very important to understand the links between the fluvial hydrophysical functioning and freshwater and coastal ecology, because that's one of the focus of this seminar, how we transfer sediments from the continents to the oceans. And of course, we're going to discuss dams and so on, because these kind of approaches are very important to design fluvial basin management strategies and to assess and mitigate hazards in fluvial basins. Why South America is so interesting for this kind of studies? Well, South America is an ideal place to discuss these aspects because we have the longest mountain chain in the planet, that is the Andes, going all around the continent. We have, related to the Andes, the longest and more extensive foreland systems surrounding the Andes and huge lowlands. And you can see green areas in the continent, huge areas of green color, so big plains. We have as well a very asymmetric divide, fluvial divide. You see that the backbone is the Andes, so all these rivers are draining toward the Atlantic, and it's a very well drained continent. A few basins basically are draining more than 2/3 of the continent. So we have, as a consequence, all the capture of moisture east of the Andes, and big rivers develop east of the Andes. The Amazon, of course, is the biggest one, right? But in addition to having these big rivers, we have also the largest megafans in Earth. Megafan, we know alluvial fan, well, megafan are formed by rivers and are really big landforms. The continent also holds major intracratonic, continental, platform, and Aulacosian sedimentary basins. So these are some of the characteristics. I'm going to show you some results about, well, how we transfer this sediment, how we trap this sediment, and how humans have been modifying these originally natural fluxes that we had in the continent. When I teach, I always challenge my students. I have been teaching a lot in geography or geology departments, environmental science. What are the largest rivers of the world in water discharge? And usually we come up with this list of 10 largest rivers in water discharge because in reality we have 7 that can go to the ocean and reach the ocean. And this is the list of the 10 largest rivers of water discharge. And we have 7 in reality: the Yangtze, Brahmaputra, Congo, Amazon, Orinoco, Parana, and Mississippi. But what about the other 10, the other 3 that are missing in this list? Well, these are 3 tributaries of the Amazon. The Amazon is so big, so important, that 3 of the 10 largest rivers of the world are tributaries of the Amazon. The Madeira River number 4, the Negro River number 5, and the Chapura River or Caquetá River, the river practically unknown for many specialists in fluvial systems, is one of the top 10 rivers in the world. So you can see that the Yangtze is very close in size to the Madeira and the Negro. And the Chapura is in between the Brahmaputra and the Mississippi. So 6 of the 10 largest rivers of the world in water discharge are in South America. But when we consider the tropical regions, also South America is very impressive because we have 24 of the 34 largest tropical rivers in water discharge in South America, and 18 of them are related to the Amazon basin of the Amazon forest. We published this in a paper in 2005, tropical rivers have been pretty well used by students and so on. So South America is a fluvial paradise when compared to other countries, other continents, and also because many of the rivers are not regulated yet. Also, we have the largest continuous belt of floodplains in the continent, this huge environmental mosaic of continental aquatic ecosystems. We have the largest and most diverse fluvial wetland of the world, good part of them are in Brazil. For example, tree diversity can be more than 900 flood-tolerant tree species per hectare. So we have in some time more than 140 species, and more than 2,000 species of fish. And we discover every year, scientists are discovering more species. So, but what about sediment? That is the focus of this seminar. Well, for years, we have been using classic papers that have been pioneer papers, very important ones like Milliman and Mead since the 80s, where always appear the Southeast Asia and Asia is the area that produce more sediment in the world, with the sediment yields and transfer to the ocean. South America, on the other side, is not transferring too much in comparison to the amount of big river that we have. So this is something that appears since the 80s and was not changing too much until recently with the new publication that we have on this topic, like you can see here with the Milliman and Farfan. Into this context, people still considering that Southeast Asia produces a lot of sediment, and that 2% is an area working now with research. 2% of the land probably produce 20-25% of the global sediment transfer to the oceans, a typical work by Milliman and collaborators. But the problem with this is that you see these kind of graphics here, is that we have suspended sediment low drainage basin area. What we have here indicating this figure is that independently, this is what is important, independently of the size of the drainage basin area, authors like Milliman and so on, they are telling that Southeast Asia produce more per unit of drainage basin area than any other continent in the planet, is what we have in this stuff. We have been working in a different direction. And we believe that, well, how much sediment produce the Andes indeed? Is the largest and second highest orogenic belt in the planet after the Himalayas. So we published this in 2014, this paper on sediment yield in the Andes using real data, 119 gauge stations with suspended sediment concentration and suspended sediment transport values in South America in Andean catchments. And we produced this with Professor Juan Restrepo from Colombia, from University of Airfield. So we were dividing the Andes in different sectors from north to south, following the morphotectonic subdivision of the Andes, Northern Andes, Central Andes of Peru, Bolivia, Central Andes, Argentina, Southern Andes. And it was a big surprise that we have really big sediment yields in these mountains. You can see extreme values, for example, in Bolivia of 18 1,000 tons per square kilometer per year of sediment yield. In the Chaco, we can reach 14,000. So in general, we have big amounts in the central Andes, and of course, we decrease when we go projection to the south. It became more arid here, or more wet and lower on the south. So what this interest is very, very big values everywhere, basically, in all these areas draining toward the west sides of the Andes, the Orinoco Basin, the Amazon Basin, and the Parana Basin here, where we have the biggest rivers. Interestingly as well, of course, the sediment yield in relation to the area cannot be easily drawn like a line on a basic correlation. So we were not using this basic correlation of sediment yield or drainage area and sediment transport. So you can see the dispersion is pretty big, but when we go to mean annual water yield, the specific water that can do the geomorphologic work of eroding and transporting sediment per unit of area, we see that, for example, in the Northern Andes, we can increase the amount of water, but we are not increasing too much the sediment yields. But in the Chaco region, in the Bolivian, southern Bolivian and northern Argentina, we can get variability of a lot of variability in sediment yield and without having too much variability in the mean annual water yield. So each area behaves differently, indicating that there are other environmental factors like the kind of rocks and relief and so on that also play a very important role. So we came up with these results here, how much sediment and what is the sediment yield in average for all these areas of the Andes, and how much sediment we transfer toward the Orinoco Plains, to the Amazon, and to the Parana system. And pay attention that in the Peruvian Andes, no, we don't have too much high values of sediment yield. You can see here pretty flat curve of sediment yield in between 600 and 1,000 tons per square kilometers per year. We will discuss later why this is happening. We faced a lot of problem at the time to publish this paper because we got rejections in big journal like Nature. We got rejections finally after a year of reviewing geology, because people were not accepting that these basins were producing as much sediment like Southeast Asia. Say, no, it's not possible. And in reality, we published this before in 2015 in this basic diagram in Tropical Rivers paper in geomorphology with Rashid Sinha from India and José Estevão from Brazil. But we already claimed at the time that these rivers were producing as much sediment like the Himalayas and the Southeast Asian rivers. And this is the plot of 2014. In conclusion, what we have is that the Andean rivers are some of the most productive in terms of sediment yields at global scale. And you have this comparison of different regions of the Andes with Himalayan rivers. You see, they are of the tops, very tall mountains, and how Southeast Asia is plotting below that. Yeah? And of course, Europe with the Pyrenees and the Alps is significantly lower. So a total, we estimate that 2.5 to 3.3 gigatons per year of suspended sediment. We are looking only to suspended sediment, what people measure in gauge station, is transferred toward the Amazon or the Orinoco or the Parana east of the Andes. And the sediment yields average are very high, 3,000 to near 5,000 or 2,600, depending where you are in the Andes. So this is not correct because the drainage basin, independently of the area, is not that Southeast Asia is producing more suspended sediment load than these mountains. So we have all this amount of sediments, where this sediment is going. So we have to explain this moderate transferring of sediment to the ocean. So we have to get big sinks in South America. And who are these big sinks? We estimated that 0.5 to 1.7 gigatons probably are quickly deposits in the surrounding areas of the foreland and in the intramountain sedimentary basin. The Andes are tectonically decomposed. So we have also internal basins in the Andes that are still trapped in sediments. This is the first sink. The second sink can be megafans, large rivers, and other abusive fluvial systems. So I told you that the biggest megafans in Earth, and they are active, are in the Chaco. They are complex composite landforms that have been evolving during the whole Quaternary, basically, but still active. So we have 6 big megafans from north to south. You can see all the river, and you see here the inputs from the Andes of each megafan. These are not very big rivers. These are small rivers in terms of discharge, 300 cubic meters and something like that, and or less. And these are the sediment yields in the Andes. But this river transports a huge amount of sediment. The Bermejo River, this is this guy here, can transport more than 90 million tons that are transferred to the Parana River here. But the Pilcomayo is transporting 140 million tons of sediment and never reached the Paraguay River at the Parana Basin and became stored in the Chaco Plain. 140 million tons is a lot. The concentration of this river can reach more than 40,000 milligrams per liter. That's the reason the river is Bermejo, mean red in Spanish. It's so high concentration of sediment. Right, 60% of all this sediment is trapped in the plain, never reached the ocean, is in the Chaco Plain or in the northern parts of the Chaco in Bolivia. Part go to the Amazon basin here, part go to the Parana basin in the south. So this is a big sink. What other sink we have? Well, in the central areas of Brazil, the highlands, this is a catatonic landscape. So we don't have too much sediment yield here. This is only 15 to 40 tons per square kilometers per year. So this is pretty low. It's a logic. We are in a catatonic region. But we have a big area with megafans. One of the biggest wetlands in the planet is the Pantanal of Mato Grosso, formed by coalescing megafan. The most famous is the Taquari megafan, 35,000 square kilometers in size. It's more than 3 times bigger than the Kosi megafan in the Himalayas. But this is not trapping too much because there is not too much production of sediment. So the maximum probably we can get here is a trapping zone of 8 million tons of sediments per year in the Pantanal of Mato Grosso with these megafans. But we are adding sediment that is retained in the continent. Another mechanism to store these sinks, to store sediment, are abusive rivers. They can be meandering, but they also suffer abulsion. So 2 areas are very important for this process. One is the Beni Plain in Bolivia, and have been well studied by several geomorphologists, Rolf Alto, Emmanuel Gautier, but the fluxes analysis also for the French scientists demonstrate that probably we have more than 280 million tons of storage before this river draining the Andes reach the Madeira River. At the Madeira River, this go to the Amazon. This sediment is not arriving to the Amazon, it's not transferred to the Amazon. Another big sink is the Magdalena area here. We have in the foreland the Momposina or Mompox depression. It's a tectonic basin, where more than 20 million tons of sediment are stored every year in this kind of environment that you can see here. And this is the Beni Plain with the meanders. This is the Momposina depression in the Magdalena Basin. We don't know too much about the Orinoco yet, but we probably estimate that probably 100 million tons can be stored there, but the Orinoco have been less studied than the other systems. What about large axial rivers like the Amazon, like the Parana? There is a big discussion among geologists, and I'm including it. We published a paper, Who is Who in the Geological Record in 2015 in Earth Science Review about this topic. Because some sedimentologists say that, okay, megafans are very important to store sediment, and they represent the most characteristic archives of fluvial sediment in the geological history. Because large axial rivers just transfer sediments to the ocean. You say, no, we disagree. Large axial rivers is still trapping very much a lot of sediments. And because of the tectonic setting, they can be preserved longer even than many of the megafans because they are in cratonic basin. A cratonic basin can last more longer in the geological time. What is going on today in terms of large axial rivers? So we published these results pretty recently in geology. One of my former students, now a professor in NTU, Edward Park, and we demonstrated that at least 120 million tons of wash load are every year stored along the lower Amazon between more or less a little upstream of Manaus to Monte Alegre, this area here, right? More or less 800 kilometers of river length. And more is stored before the river arrives. There is necessary more studies of sediment basins downstream in Monte Alegre. And after all this is dispersed and distributed toward the ocean, and Paul and other people in this seminar have been talking, I will talk about the details of this distribution in the ocean of all this sediment. But it's a big sediment trap that we have in the actual rivers like the Amazon, 120 million tons per year in 800 kilometers. What about the Parana River? Remember that the Parana River is not getting too much sediment from the cratons, but it's getting a lot of sediment from this small river that is the Bermejo River coming from the Andes. This guy here, the Parana, is 18,000 cubics in water discharge, but it's not transporting too much sediment. This small river like the Bermejo is 300 cubic meters, but transport 90 million tons of sediment that are introduced in the Parana. So the 100 million tons of sediment that arrives to the Atlantic Ocean are coming from this small catchment here. That's what is interesting, right? However, 17 to 60 million tons is our estimation. We are working in collaboration with colleagues from Argentina in Santa Fe, Ricardo Supiani, Carlos Ramonel. We have this storage in the floodplain. You can see in the different seasons how much sediment can be transferred to the floodplain every year. So 17 to 60 million tons of sediment. So at least we have now a very good idea or diagnosis of where is this sediment stored that never arrives to the ocean, despite we produce such a big amount of sediment in the Andes. What about human impact? How we are modifying now these fluxes? So in South America, like many other parts of the world, but this in South America have been more recent because the expansion of this impact is more recent. We have dams and changes in land cover, deforestation mainly. I'm going to discuss quickly these two aspects. Let's start with deforestation, land cover changes. Deforestation have been massive in the continent in the last decades. And this is mainly because of the expansion of the agricultural frontiers and cattle ranching. So the two most impacted fluvial basins that we can identify clearly, like, okay, land cover change is the most important factor here, modifying the river dynamics, is the Araguaia River in central Brazil, is together with the Tocantins, the Araguaia-Tocantins Basin here, number 4, and the Magdalena River in the northern South America in the Andes of Colombia here. So let's talk a little about these two examples. The Magdalena have been thoroughly studied by my colleague Juan Restrepo and collaborators. They have been producing a significant number of results about this basin. But you can see some of the results. This is just in 20 years, how much was the deforestation here. Very, very, very dramatic deforestation, and keep going and increasing. So for Juan Restrepo and collaborators, they say that this basin was changing a sediment yield from 550 million tons per square kilometer a year before 2000 to more than 1,700 tons per square kilometers per year. So this is an increase of more than 44 million tons of sediment per year in this area because of deforestation. What about central Brazil? Because in this river, in the Araguaia River, it's a big river like this, equivalent in sediment in water discharge to the Danube in Europe, but a very big river in Europe. This is a the middle Araguaia is a low sinuosity ana branching with tendency to provide a lot of sediment load, but it's sandy, not too much suspended load because it's draining the cratonic zone. We identify that, okay, the expansion of the agricultural frontier of the Cerrado Biome, that is here in yellow, this biome used to be 2 billion square kilometers in size, was practically 70% destroyed by expansion of agricultural cattle ranching. And all this having impact in the river. The river doesn't have any dam, so we can see the real response of the river to deforestation. So all this was developed on all terrain of the Gondwana landscapes that have big saprolites. So there is a big erosion in many areas. This is close to Brasilia, the capital city of Brazil. Look at the deforestation have been massive in the last 40 years. So not too much vegetation remains. And this is the main area that produces soybean and cattle ranch that is being exported to China today. The Araguaia River have been suffering a metamorphosis, have been increasing the transport of sediment, is modifying and storing sediments of different landforms. Like you can see here, atrophy of channels, increasing of the number of bars, increasing the vertical accretion rates. And with it, we identified that until 2010, or 2009, sorry, we got 230 million tons of sediment storage in 700 kilometers length in the last 40 years. And this is related to also an increase in the sediment transport of bed load and suspended sand, because it's really sand that we are moving here, that have been increasing through the decades following the trend of deforestation through time. And you can see as well here the increase of the gross domestic product of the counties in this basin that are mainly linked to, of course, agribusiness. So we changed as well the hydrology of the system in part, but people also, the politicians are blaming global change, climate change, sorry, but in reality it's not necessarily climate change. So the deforestation here, we produced this paper yesterday with Mike Coy and collaborators, Mike Coy from the Woodhull, is that the increasing water discharge that we see is related mainly, two-thirds of these changes, to deforestation and not to climate change. So these are the two extreme cases of deforestation and big rivers in South America. What about dams? Well, we know that dams produce a huge impacts on fluvial systems, are terrible for fluvial system in many sense, environmentally speaking, and hydrologically speaking. But since a long time, we know diagrams like this one, that the trapping efficiency of dam can be huge. This is kind of a global analysis in the 2000s. We have been generating more, many authors have been generating more and new updates about this. But I always say to the young generation, be carefully when you use global databases, because many times we have a person doing global databases that is not familiar with the region of the world they are studying. For example, they have been used a lot, but these have very, very important mistakes in this figure, because they are, here the Orinoco seems that it's trapping 80 to 100% of the sediment. That is not true. And the Parana seems to be trapping 60 to 80% of the sediment. That is not true. We saw that 100 million tons are coming to the ocean and practically coming to the Bermejo. What we are trapping is only the sand coming from the Brazilian territory. So be careful with this database analysis at global scale. Let's see what happened with the big basins of central cratonic area of Brazil. So 4, 5, and 2 are Araguaia, Tocantins, San Francisco, and Parana Basin. All these rivers are massively impacted by hydropower. Remember that more than basically 90% of the electric power of Brazil is generated by a little more than 400 power dams. So all these rivers are basically regulated today. They don't have more typical natural conditions. The most impacted is the Parana River. 90% of the vegetation basically disappeared in this basin in Brazilian territory. And look at this example from Professor Estevão from Brazil that have been working a lot on these aspects. After the construction of Porto Primavera Dam in this point here, basically no sediment is transferred. And here, yes, it's true. 90 to 100% of the sediment is not passing Porto Primavera downstream. And remember that we have downstream Porto Primavera, Itaipu Dam, that together with Three Gorges is one of the largest dams in the planet. You can see some picture here. And after we have Chasireta in Argentina. So no sediment is transferred downstream to the Paraná and to the ocean. And you see here it's all regulated system. This is the sequence of dams in the Parana River, right? But the sediment is coming through this way, downstream. The wash load that going to the delta is coming freer. That's the reason we are not affecting too much the deposition zone. However, all the Atlantic area of South America have been impacted. And we don't have too much sediment now arriving to the east coast of Brazil, because all these cratonic rivers have been impacted by that. So we have a deficit of sediment in the coastal areas here, but we keep more or less a good balance in the La Plata estuary. What about the Amazon? Well, for a long time, the Amazon was free of this impact. Just a few dams existed, but the number of dams is increasing. So big dams have been under construction. Some of them are finished. Belo Monte in the Xingu finished. More dams are finished in the Andes, and big dams in the Madeira River were finished. So what about the trend of dams construction in the Amazon? The government have been planning more than the governments of the different countries in the Amazon basin have been planning more than 400 dams in this basin. So we did this is a multidisciplinary study with a bunch of colleagues of different disciplines, ecologists, socioeconomists, etc., and geographers. And I started to analyze the vulnerability of the Amazon to dams. So I have some distribution here of the dams in different geologic settings. So fluvial basins draining decratonic zone have a different characteristic and different vulnerability that fluvial basin draining the Andes, where we produce good part of the sediments. Then we have to transfer downstream toward the floodplains and toward the ocean. In decratonic rivers, the rivers are not very dynamic laterally, so all the communities of ecology communities depend mainly on the flood pulses. This river transport not too much sediment at all. The most infamous, I could say, project of decratonic rivers is the Belo Monte Dam. Is one of the biggest dams in the planet. The cost was probably $18 billion. But in reality, for the Amazon system, it's not producing too much impact. The impact exists, of course, but it's mainly localized in some 100 kilometers length of the river. We are working as well at making an assessment of this. But this was very famous in the news because there was a lot of conflicts with the indigenous nations in this part of the Amazon. So there were very, very strong social conflicts here that became very promoted in the news. However, nobody has been talking too much about the Tapajos. It's the neighbor basin. It's a big also cratonic system. And this is more vulnerable than the Belo Monte Dam area and the Xingu because there is a sequence of proposed dams in these rivers, and all the impound area, the length on the impound area by dam, if constructed, should be so big that should be impossible to do it in a developed country. The length of this impound area should be as long as it reach along the Mississippi from Memphis to New Orleans, or a line from Madrid to a little more farther than Paris in Europe. So a huge area should be impacted. This is the most vulnerable river in the crater. But in the Andes, we have also a big problem because a small catchment can be a big headache because of these source-to-sink issues that we are discussing in this seminar. They produce a lot of sediment, and all this sediment build the floodplains, transform this, transport the nutrients, and also reach the oceans and feed the sediment plume in the ocean. And we have two bottlenecks in the Amazon. One is in the north, the Ucayali-Marañón confluence here, and the other is the Madre de Dios Beni bottleneck here toward the Madeira. So this is exporting more than 1 billion tons toward the Amazon system, right? We have an additional problem. Remember that these two areas are fed by Peruvian rivers. And in Peru, remember that we have this flat distribution of sediment yields that is not real. This is because we don't have data enough. It's not because the Peruvian Andes produce less than in the north or in the south. So this is a big problem because we are planning a lot of dams in Peru when in reality it's the less studied area in terms of sediment yields and source-to-sinks approach that are necessary for planning. The biggest tributary of the Amazon and one of the top 10 rivers is the Madeira. The Madeira introduced near 50% of the total sediment load of the Amazon. It's very, very important. 50% of the sediment entering the Amazon, more or less, roughly, through the Madeira. It's a big river. It's almost twice the water discharge of the Mississippi River, right? And big dams were built close to the Brazilian-Bolivian border, San Antonio and Cerrado Dam at the cost of more than 15 billion. These are the biggest run-of-river projects in the world. They are operating already. And the Madeira at this point was transporting more sediment and more water than the Yangtze and Three Gorges. But we had a big discussion on Three Gorges. I was remembering in 2000 in China discussing this when this was at the early stages of discussion in the international community. And we never discussed basically the Madeira with the international community. This area also was beautiful, held the second largest rapids in the world in water discharge after the Congo. The lower Congo is the biggest one in terms of water discharge, the rapid. And it used to be habitat of more than 1,000 species. Now all gone this because of the dams. They started to operate a few years ago. Was euphoria about that because they're generating, generation of power. But problems start to appear because in Three Gorges and so on, you have big gorges. But here is a very flat landscape, 90 meters above sea level. So there is no space here, as you can see on this photograph. There is nowhere to contain the water in elevation. So any mistake in a few meters is a problem. There is no capacity of storage. We are studying this. We have been doing a lot of field work with my team and with Brazilian collaborators and people from the University of Florida. And what we have is we are having identified a decrease in sediment concentration because this was promoted that run-of-river system should be not trapping too much sediment. When in reality, we see that there is an interesting, very important impact. So our study of vulnerability also tells us that the Madeira Basin, let's pay attention to this one on the lowermost right side of the figure, we call DEVI, is a dam environmental vulnerability index that we create for this paper in Nature, is that the Madeira is the most vulnerable systems in terms of dams that can be constructed, if they became constructed, of the whole Amazon. And it is followed by the Marañón and Ucayali in Peru and the Tapajós River Basin in the Craton. Right? That should be our diagnosis about that. In a recent paper, we also multidisciplinary paper with ecologists and so on, specialists in fish and trees and birds. We published this a few months ago, is that we have also a very nice, no, it's bad, but it's an overlap between the most vulnerable basins and the richest areas of biodiversity in terms of fish, birds, and trees. What is a big issue as well. So we have a lot of impacts going on. What about mega scale impacts? One problem is sometimes that we don't integrate at the bigger scales the analysis. And that's a perfect topic because this seminar is trying to confront this kind of how we have to integrate everything in the source to sink approach. So in the Amazon, we have that the big amount of sediment, and Paul Liu was explaining this in the introductory lecture of this seminar, showing different figures and different rivers. The Amazon plume is distributed to the north, right? When arrive all this sediment, going toward the Atlantic coast of northern South America, right? It's a huge plume. Sediment can be distributed near, close to near 1 million square kilometers, can be detectable in the ocean. Of course, there is more concentration in more proximal zone than this line. But what happens if we impact all these fluxes of sediment with dust? So this is just an exercise that we did. We have this calibrated model that with field data from the river, and we use this model of field calibrated data models in the mouth. And you can see here what can happen if we decrease 20, 40, 60, or 80% with the change services as idealized scenario just to illustrate. And a small animation, the impacts on the plume and the coastal area of South America. This is a very rich area in terms of biodiversity. All the mangroves of the very big mangrove of the east coast of South America depend on this mud and the distribution by the littoral processes along the coast. There are a lot of good people in this seminar going to explain this in more detail about that. This is because we're ready to use these sediments toward the east coast of South America. And there is also a new coral reef that was described beneath a layer of muddy materials in the Atlantic. But everybody's talking about the Amazon, but this is not talking about other problems that we face in the country, in the continent, that are very, very serious. The most serious problem that we have probably are the Chaco, but the main one is the biome Cerrado. The Cerrado, I told you, was where the Araguaia River is, and where all these big dams of central Brazil, San Francisco, Paraná, Tocantins rivers are. This area was absolutely destroyed in the last 4 or 5 decades. 70% of this biome gone, and now is the main area producing a global scale soybean and beef. But now we have 800 dams are planned here. 800 dams are planned to be built in this biome, right? A lot of more than in the Amazon. And in an area that already have been strongly impacted. Also, there is big pressure on irrigation pipe pivots. And you can see here is the area with the major concentration of irrigation pivot. Is another paper that we published recently, a multidisciplinary paper, thousands of pivots. Some area you can see all the vegetation gone. The Parana basin is not having anything remaining, basically in the Cerrado biome. The only river that remain in free condition with no regulation by dams is the Araguaia, and we are fighting, and I appeal you, all of you here, to help us to preserve the Araguaia. We can be fighting for the Araguaia. It's the only river that remains free of dams for the next generations in all this huge region. And the area is very rich in biodiversity. 1/4 of all the fishes species of fishes of South America are here, and 42% are in endangered species of Brazil, right? Also, we have a big biodiversity in terms of flood-tolerant species of trees. So it's a key area for hotspot for biodiversity, right? So we hope to preserve the Araguaia. Well, time is short. I have been running, and we can get more discussion with questions. But before I finish, I want to say who is triggering this kind of impacts in terms of dams and deforestation. Dams is clear have been for hydropower, the expectation that the economies can grow up, and hydropower, unfortunately, were highly promoted in the last decade, like clean energy, by the lobbies of climate change. Climate change was the main point for discussion, and the government take advantage of that because hydropower was considered for many like clean energy. And that was terrible for the tropical systems because, okay, so let's do it. And the government were promoting that they were building clean energy. So that was a big issue in destroying the second way, the destruction that was a water resource of this system after deforestation. The second impact is agribusiness, because with the expansion of the Chinese economy, there was more and more demand by soybean, about demand of beef. So Brazil became the #1 producer for all this. Today, we have 2.4 million of square kilometers deforested. This is a huge, huge, huge area. This means the same size, basically a little less than the size of the whole Argentina, that this Argentina is one of the biggest countries in the planet. And all that to export 100 billion tons of in agribusiness. So the government was very happy in 2018 because they reached a record of 100 billion tons of in export. But who are the biggest agricultural exporter of food, basically, in the planet? Well, the #1 is the United States. Who is the #2? And this is the big surprise for many, probably not for many of you, but at least for many when I talk about these issues. And these are the Dutch. The Netherlands produce and export 100 billion tons as well, $100 billion as well of agricultural exports. And this is incredible, right? They produce, these are the second biggest exporter in the planet, and they produce the same than Brazil, but with a big difference, right? Brazil used the equivalent to 122 Netherlands agricultural lands. So for every $40,000 per square kilometer of goods that we produce in Brazil, the Dutch are producing $5 million per square kilometers per year. Such a big difference. Yeah, I say David and Goliath. Concluding my talk, some general conclusions. Okay, so we have some areas that remain more or less in equilibrium in terms of sediment transport to the ocean, areas like here that are in a deficit of sediment transfer to the ocean. We have areas that start to be impacted like the Amazon, but still not getting a very clear analysis because it's so huge and we have too much sinks and so on in between that we need to go one by one trying to quantify in a better way and not just simplifying this about what is exported to the ocean. We have two areas with increased sediment yields and transport in the central Brazil and in the Magdalena basins, right? And of course, we have an increase in trapping by dams at continental scale. Persisting this model of development in the continent, the natural condition of the Amazon will be deeply impacted in 2 or maximum 3 decades. But we can say that the Cerrado is at the critical environment situation. And this concentrates the largest area with planted dams. What is hopeful here, in the case of Brazil at least, is that there is a good legislation about how we can manage water resources and so on. The problem is to enforce it. But in many cases, it's better than in many places of the United States. So there is hope that if we apply this kind of policies that already are there, we don't have to create new legislation in many cases just to adapt and to enforce it, to get good management plans. So there is some hope. Well, this is more or less what I have to show you. And of course, I'm open to questions and comments, and you want to share also your own experience. Probably you know many of these places as much as I know.
Wow, thank you, Edgardo. This is very, very informative. Lots of information, and I'm pretty sure I need to go back to rewatch this presentation for a couple of times, and also I need to turn on the caption to catch every word you try to see. It's great. It's a fantastic talk. So we have a question from our audience. Professor Colin Woodruff from Australia, I think now almost the midnight. So Colin, would you like to just speak your question directly?
Sure, I'm still awake. Fantastic, that's a great presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think I'm probably the only person in the Southern Hemisphere. And my question is, it's on the chat there. You started talking at the continental scale, and I'd like to ask a question at the hemispherical scale. How does the Southern Hemisphere compare with the Northern Hemisphere? And so, of course, I think of South America as if it was in the Southern Hemisphere, but the Amazon catchment delivers sediment virtually to the equator, and most of it goes into the Northern Hemisphere. And most of the sediment contributions you're indicating are in the Northern Hemisphere. I'm not sure what sort of role the Congo plays, but again, it's not a sedimentary coast where it delivers the sediment to. I guess, so the Parana, in a sense, seems to be the only major catchment in the Southern Hemisphere that's contributing to the coast. Of course, I'm asking a question here as a coastal geomorphologist. I'm just interested in why our Southern Hemisphere coasts are so different from the Northern Hemisphere, and what you've said today really emphasizes that to me again.
Yes, very interesting geographical perspective. In the terms of the what we have here, in terms of you mentioned the production of sediment, the circularity of the basin show that, of course, you point this very well. Good part of the sediment in the Amazon is transferred basically very close to, a little south of the, at the edge of the equator, a little south of the equator, but it's transferred after to the north through the ocean, right? So it was my timing here. But the production of sediment is mainly linked to the tectonic setting, right? So in the southern hemisphere, we produce a lot of sediments. The problem is that they are not reaching, in good part of them are not reaching the ocean, right? In the case of South America, because we have this new geotectonic unit that is the Andes in comparison to other areas of the southern hemisphere, like Africa. So we have a big production. The second point is that the Gondwana landscapes and terrain that we have in both sides of the Atlantic is Eastern Brazil and Africa, like you were mentioning the Congo. They are characterized by this all terrain with low sediment yields. Right? So that should be the typical, I could say, Gondwana styles basins, cratonic basin with, what you say, produce not too much sediment transfer to the ocean. Right? But I think the main control is the geotectonic unit that we have in both sides.
Great, thanks. Yeah, good talk, lovely talk.
Thank you.
Okay, very good. So anybody have a question? I saw Michael unmute. Michael, you have a question?
Actually, yeah, I found this interesting in terms of the sediment trap, because I contrast, say, if you look at like the Tigris, Euphrates, Persian Gulf in front of the Zagros, the foreland is only half filled, and so the sediment is still reaching an arm of the ocean, versus where I work with the Ganges Brahmaputra, where you've totally filled the basin, and most of the sediment is bypassing to the ocean and not staying in the foreland, where you have an in-between case where the foreland is filled and is fluvial, but is still trapping a very large percentage of the sediments. And it's an interesting interplay of the tectonics and the sedimentation.
Yes, very, thank you for this very interesting comment, because this is something that we have been working on, and I was not aware about this topic that you mentioned in the Euphrates area, because we have indeed what you say. So we have transferring of equilibrium downstream, upstream to downstream in this system. Generally, of course, that good part of this is to Shendai deltas and so on. So in our opinion, one of the models I have, the paradox of large rivers, is that many of these systems were not reaching equilibrium yet since the last glacier, right? So they're still building up this. And many others, because of environmental conditions, were abort and became, like fossilized in time. If you see in my first slide, for example, many people doing modeling ask me for data every year, but you got, let's see this island, for example. You see this island are in the Negro River. It's the biggest fluvial archipelago in the planet. It's the Anavillanas Islands. It's 15 kilometers width fluvial reach. 15 kilometers width, right? It's a lot for a river, right? And 40 kilometers or more in length, this island. These islands are fossils. The river is not transporting sediment at all. So all this is part of this autogenic adjustment that the system have been suffering since the last glacier. We have different mosaic of evolution that remain like abort through time, but looks like fresh landforms. So yes, you are totally right about that we have this transference in different reaches. And of course, this distribution is affected, like you mentioned, in the Brahmaputra or in the case of the Euphrates, in terms of also the tectonic setting that we are crossing through.
Okay.
It's not always that. Yeah.
Tom Bianchi. Tom.
Yes, Edgardo, enjoyed the talk very much. I guess one of the things I'm thinking about that's also interesting with respect to dams in South America is, as you mentioned, they don't have a lot of these steep valleys to hold the water. a lot of this is sort of very flat plains once you get out into these areas where they're damming. Are there many cases being made for the idea that because it is that way, that also will increase the probability of greenhouse gas production in these stored waters? And that may offset some of the benefits. I mean, maybe the economics are just totally swamping any argument against this in terms of greenhouse gases in these reservoirs, but I'm just wondering how much of that continues to be argued.
That's it. Yeah. Of course, I'm not a specialist in green gases and so on, but there is people that have been working on when you flood big areas, like happened, for example, in Balbina, have been happening in some areas like that, old style dams. So scientists have been claiming that there is a significant amount of gases that we can produce. So there was a big discussion about that. And the recent projects like Belo Monte, or particularly with the big Madeira basins dams, the idea was that, well, we are moving to a modern design that is run of rivers dams. So we don't create big reservoirs. Right? So the reservoir is basically very small because it's basically the river and a little flooded areas around. So they say we decrease with that the impacts. And there is some people that was publishing, Brazilian and American colleagues, the very good ones, that they said, well, but the impact is not too much because if we measure, the water quality and so on, and there is a lot of movement in the water, we are not getting to store too much here and to produce gases and so on. However, I believe that this is the problem with run-of-river dams like these ones, is that they produce impact. We are demonstrating that they can produce a lot of impacts because they are not 100% just run-of-river. They create a big backwater effect. They flood the lower areas of the floodplains. They increase the water table everywhere. And they impact a lot tributaries because they are working these dams all the time at bank full, and this soft, we say is flat, so they can impact for long distances all these tributaries. So that's the point. I believe that is happening, that this new design that say, well, we minimize the greenhouse effect, but there are other issues as well.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. It's answering part of your question.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay, anybody else? Edgardo, I have a question. In many Asia large river systems like the Mekong, Irrawaddy, the big problem we are facing is the sand mining, the dredging, because they remove almost more than half of the river carry on sediment now, by the dredging sand mining. How about the South America? Is this not an issue so far? Not yet?
Yes, very, very important point. We have been working a lot in the Irrawaddy now in Myanmar. And we submitted the paper this week about sand mining and a new method to detect sand mining in the Irrawaddy, where there was massive activity of sand mining.
Yes. We
have this problem in like a priority in South American rivers. Of course, there is sand mining. But the major problem is mining, not sand mining. It's mining. Mining have been very intense in many areas of the Amazon. Garimpos, people is extracting,
There's an increased sediment.
Yeah, but in some places, directly the river was destroyed. So you go to the Madre de Dios basin, in the upper catchment, the river basically disappeared. Some of these tributaries, right? Because the mining was so intense that it's grotesque, it's absurd what was going on there, right? So you have these areas, and you can find in Southeast Asia some areas like this as well. But the river basically were destroyed for mining, not specifically for sand mining for construction. right? It's a different impacts. Sand mining here is not so extreme. We have sand mining, but it's not extreme, like in Asia, Southeast Asia, like in Mekong, Irrawaddy, and so on.
Very good. So last year, last year, there's a paper published in Science. You know, he said, you know, because the plume from Amazon caused the largest, the big Atlantic Sargasso belt, you know, like a sea. Do you know that paper by Lin Training's group? Who Training's group?
What they say, I don't remember that. What is it?
Let me see this one quickly. You know, have you noted this paper? You said, you know, about
the Sargasso belt. No, I didn't read this one.
Oh yeah, because there's some discussion, maybe deforestation, something happened on the river basin, caused, you know, from all the way from 2000, there's a big change. You see, this is 2011 to 17, the change.
This is the Sargasso in direction to Mexico, right? The Sargasso.
No.
Sargasso,
you see here?
Algae. No, I didn't read this about the Amazon. No.
Okay, that's fine.
What I think that is interesting about the Amazon plume was a paper generated by the colleague from UT in the Jackson School, a climatologist, that they say that the plume generate also, of course, variability in subsurface temperature. And if we modify the model that they have, is that we can impact the generation and direction of tropical storms through the Caribbean zone toward the Gulf. Okay. So this is something that we mentioned quickly in the papers, but I think it's an interesting result showing these inter-hemispheric connections between the plume and the circulation toward the Gulf.
Okay, so if any question from the audience?
See that Yoshiki Saito is there.
So if not, and maybe we can end it here. Once again, I already posted the link of this presentation. So if you want to rewatch this presentation, you can go on the YouTube. And so once again, this coming next week, we have 2 more talks. Professor Hu Jie talk about the Yellow River, and Swisky next Friday talk about the overall the global Anthropocene, the source to sink, the response, the contribution to the Earth system. So please come back. So I'll see you next week. So thank you very much.
Well, I would like to say thank you to everybody that was attending the talk. And of course, thank you to you, Paul, for the invitation. Thank you.
Very good. So you mentioned that you have people that you're already coming up. Please do send me a copy.
I hope that we can publish this soon. Yeah, it's already submitted.
Okay.